Hey everyone, it's Mrs. Wallace. How are you? I hope you are enjoying this very nice weekend, nice long weekend, right? I think everybody needed it. I just wanted to do this short video as a way of bridging some of the content for us. It appears that we don't have that many class periods left. This week we will meet on Thursday. Next week we meet Monday and Tuesday. And the following week on Monday, you will have a quiz on World War I. So that gives us a few class periods to prepare for that. Think of the content in a couple of different sections. One is the causes of the war in Europe, and then there's also reasons why the United States gets involved in the war and some of the role that the United States plays in the war and also effects on the home front from the war. We'll also look at the end of the war and the 14 points and the Treaty of Versailles. So these are all topics that we'll be spending time on, and I just wanted to do this video to kind of help us get some of that content. There will be some notes and a Brinkley text packet about World War I posted for you. I'll also repost the long fuse, so you can kind of refer to that in terms of the causes of World War I. And I'll also put up a note sheet for you so that you have a nice outline of notes that kind of goes along with the Brinkley text. And so at least in terms of preparation, it'll be clear what types of content the quiz is on, and then, questions just continue to bring to class. A few things. So this video is really focused on the U.S. At war. So this will include a little bit about the home front, a little bit about the U.S. role. Remember that we had looked at, the U.S. really not being really good at being a neutral player. Arguably, the government as a neutral declared country couldn't take sides, but businesses could. So what we see enveloped is a great number of businesses are largely providing munitions to the Allies and not so much to the Central Powers. This is facilitating a great economic boom in the United States and also a lot of armaments to the Allies. But it is affecting the Germans, and there is a lot of outcry and even some outcry at home. In the case of Norris, for example, people who are anti-war describe the United States as not necessarily neutral. But once the Germans declare in January of 1917 unrestricted submarine warfare, remember this, and then later the Zimmerman note, kind of put pressure on Wilson to ask Congress for a declaration of war, which does occur. And so by April of 1917, the U.S. is involved in the war. And we'll just kind of address some of the things that happen as a result, okay? So one of the things we see, this is a question just to give us an idea, focusing this a little bit, how much does the First World War really create a lasting change in American society? We can certainly make some claims that some groups of people will be significantly affected, in particular Black soldiers who fight in segregated troops overseas, oftentimes receiving some great respect for some of their efforts and then returning home to a society that arguably fought for greater ideals and democracy, and it doesn't seem to be the case. So we will look at like 1919 as one of the time periods where there's a great number of race riots in the United States and a lot of violence in quite a few communities over this kind of new understanding of what equal rights will be, especially for those returning from war. We also see a lot of shifts and changes for American women, some of whom have spent some time working during World War I, but we also will see the suffrage debate become louder and louder, and we'll see President Wilson pivot to become somebody who was not really in favor of suffrage to becoming somebody who puts his hat in the ring in favor of suffrage, and we will see the 19th Amendment by 1920. It's one of the big legacies of the wartime. There's a lot of changes that will occur in terms of civil liberties, especially related to freedom of speech, and so that's something that we'll be talking about. Very, very quickly in the beginning of the U.S. entry into the war, there are calls immediately for the United States to put its military under France and Great Britain with the intent of being part of the campaign, especially on the Western Front, where things are in a very bad place for the French and the British. The U.S. and President Wilson in particular does not wish to have the Americans fight under France and Great Britain. There are some exceptions. There's actually a black regiment, all black regiment from Harlem that is given permission to fight with France. And it's something that, discrimination is playing a role in there. But these soldiers ultimately have an incredibly successful, run in their service to the French. They've become American heroes largely, but most of the American military is going to serve as the American Expeditionary Force under an American-led leader, John Pershing, who had previously been the general who was searching for Pancho Villa in Mexico. He had also served in the Philippines, countless other wars. So he's kind of like a, lifelong military personality, very, very much, military to the core. Lots of people see him as like the perfect pick to become this general. By the end of World War I, he actually does have some kind of nervous breakdown and does actually challenge himself to leave the job. He does give up the generalship because he feels like he is not able to make decisions. He had also lost a wife and some members of his family in a house fire. So just like kind of, him and Wilson share this, kind of dreadful personal loss as they're pursuing what becomes this like large scale American military campaign. But we can see the top bullet here of the Selective Service Act. This gets passed in May of 1917. Pershing had gone overseas and met with the leaders in the military effort in France and Great Britain, and he had seen how desperate the circumstances were, and he knew how many men the United States needed to raise, and ultimately it would be in the millions. And so Wilson creates a Selective Service Act. It is intentionally not called the draft. It's almost pitched as a patriotic duty of volunteering. Of course, it's not volunteering. Men of a certain age are asked to register for the Selective Service Act. And then once they register, then they could potentially get picked. So there is kind of a millions, over 20 million people who are going to register, but then there is a selection of numbers where a few million men get picked. And so it is designed to be something that is going to be build up in by the American government as almost like a patriotic duty of volunteerism. The other way that initially the United States gets involved, in addition to like starting this large scale military effort to build the military, which is something that's happening on a funding level, on an arms level, and then with the Selective Service Act with men, that's going to take some time. It is not something that the United States is going to be ready for in a week. So there are training camps set up all over the country, actually not a lot of them. There's these large scale training camps. There's not many of them. And soldiers from all over the country are mingling in these camps, with the exception of Black soldiers who are completely segregated. But there is a great deal of diversity within the AEF. The convoy system becomes how the United States participates from the get-go. This is largely a capacity of the Navy and the Merchant Marines to support merchant goods that are going to the Allies. And the convoy system is basically a way of surrounding some of the supply ships so that way they are not going to be attacked by submarines. And the convoy system is actually pretty successful. The American Navy also starts to lace areas around Germany with mines. So there's a lot of efforts initially for there to be support from the U.S. Navy. You can see the photo at the bottom of troops leaving for camp. These are, people called up, kind of leaving for these training camps. Training camps were, not necessarily that long, a couple of months, and then soldiers would be shipped out. And I think I had mentioned in the past that Camp Merritt in Bergen County, it takes over 6 towns, but including Cresskill and Dumont and a few other towns, there's this large scale space where right before shipping out, soldiers get their vaccines, get a variety of information. Lots of soldiers were getting venereal disease, so they get this pamphlet that's basically how to avoid the clap. And so a whole bunch of, trature and preparation in those 3 days, and then they would march to Hoboken. broken and take a ship overseas. So this is, within the time frame of really the end of the year in 1917. Some of the first members of the Army are going to be shipping out. And you can see the recruitment poster on the right, a great deal of government propaganda at theaters in a variety of different places to recruit people to sign up for the Selective Service Act. Okay. Some of the things that we will see is the United States is really involved in two big campaigns, and largely serving alongside the British and the French. So the Americans have like some of their own battles that they face completely as American troops. Germany starts to make huge efforts toward Paris. You can see Paris on the map here. And Germany's offensive gets actually really close, like 50 miles from Paris. People in Paris are starting to evacuate, and there's a belief that Paris could fall. When that happens, Americans get involved, and they get involved mostly initially in a few places. You can see where the Marne River is. It's a place of a lot of fighting in World War I. But Chateau-Thierry, this is a place, a town of sorts, where Americans will start to push back the German offensive. And they are successful with some horrific fighting. Also, where you see Meuse-Argonne, the Argonne Forest, Americans will fight, really heroic battles there. There's a great deal of casualties. The American casualties compared to Britain and France are much smaller. Maybe number of dead in America, maybe about 112,000 compared to, millions in Britain and France and ultimately Germany. But there is a very short timeline where those deaths occur. Mostly in these specific battles. And so, really, really horrific fighting. Pershing had attempted to try to get Americans to be mobile and to move to avoid the trench warfare that had plagued some of the other soldiers. And it doesn't really work out. They really do get involved in a great number of stalemates, largely in forests and in wheat fields, rather than in trenches. But they don't move the way in which Pershing had thought they would. But over the course of time, Americans will be part of not only starting to resist a German offensive into Paris, but will start to push Germans back to Germany. And it's at that point when Germany realizes that there could be battles on their own home turf where they'll start to look at ending the war. We do see there's a great deal of American effort to finance this war, and there's usually a few different programs to note. One is there's this huge number of bonds that are sold, and everybody and anybody is encouraged to buy bonds, and the bonds raise billions of dollars, so very, very significant program. And these are called Liberty bonds. So basically the propaganda is such that, you are supporting your country by buying these bonds. The other thing that happens is, of course, new taxes. And there is an income tax that's new. It's the 16th Amendment to the Constitution, but it's increased under President Wilson, primarily to pay for the war. There's also going to be excise taxes, new taxes on goods. Some of those taxes are also going to pay for the war. The other thing that we see Wilson's administration do is create the War Industries Board. This is kind of a centralized organization. We start to see all of these war boards for the railroads, war boards for food, war boards for a variety of different types of goods. And it's very much making a government oversight over a great number of businesses. So there is a centralization to the economy. It is not perfectly centralized. There's a lot of waste and problems and some businesses and the government that are wheeling and dealing. So, profits to be had. But one significant success is likely Herbert Hoover's Food Administration. He creates an incredible campaign that is really focused on ways in which Americans at home can either conserve food, so not eat as much food at home. So you get these things like meatless Tuesdays and, no such and such food on Wednesdays. There's also a great deal of victory gardens. So there become people who are going to grow their own food, and this becomes a huge role for women in particular. And there's a lot of not only conservation of food, but movement of food from the United States to the Allies. And, the United States is largely feeding now soldiers all across the Western Front. And there's also people in the societies of the Allies that are going to be eating American food. And this entire central